You're listening to The Artist Athlete, episode 106. This podcast is dedicated to Circus. It's a place for professionals in the industry to share their stories, viewpoints, and information, and a place for outsiders to get a sneak peek into this world. Hey friends, fans, and enemies. I'm Shannon McKenna. I'm the host of the Artist Athlete podcast and the founder of theartistathlete.com. I don't know if you've heard or not, but I have a Patreon. What's a Patreon, you ask? Well, let me tell you. Patreon is this amazing service. It's a website that allows people just like you to give creators just like me small amounts of money every month so we can keep making the stuff that you love to listen to, interact with. It really is a way to support artists. So if you love what you're listening to this week, last year, patreon.com/theartistathlete is the place to go to lend your support. I know you've been thinking about it for a while. You just keep forgetting. So grab a pen, write it on the back of your hand like you did in middle school, patreon.com/theartistathlete. When you get home tonight, open up your laptop or whatever and go to patreon.com/theartistathlete. You can also download the app, Patreon, and search for The Artist Athlete. I'm right there. My guest today is Dr. Delbert Hall. Dr. Hall is a professor emeritus of the theater and dance at East Tennessee State University. He is an ETCP certified rigger and an ETCP recognized trainer. He is a member of the IATSE, oh my God, so many acronyms, Local 699, and a former safety consultant for the American Circus Educators. Delbert is an expert in performer flying, having flown performers in over 400 productions nationally, including productions at many of the major regional theater companies in the U.S. He has worked with internationally known directors such as Debbie Allen and Christopher Renshaw, and flown major performers and celebrities such as the Backstreet Boys. Remember them? Dr. Hall has published numerous articles on rigging, regularly teaches aerial rigging workshops in the U.S. and Canada. He is also a consultant for Rock Exotica and a trainer and sales representative for their butterfly lift system. He is also the author of several books on rigging, including Rigging Math Made Simple, currently in its 7th edition, and is the co-author of the Rigging Math Made Simple Workbook, the Arena Riggers Handbook, and the Theater Riggers Handbook. Here's my interview with Dr. Delbert Hall. All right. Well, Delbert Hall, welcome to the Artist Athlete podcast.
Thank you.
Can you start out by explaining a little bit about who you are and what you do in the circus industry?
Well, I'm a rigger, and I got my start in the circus industry through flying performers for stage shows such as Peter Pan and Wizard of Oz and Mary Poppins and things like that. I started doing that back in the dark ages around 1981. And so I got introduced into the circus world through a friend of mine whose daughter was performing and gotten interested and started performing. And so he started learning about the rigging, and we did a workshop together. And I said, well, this is very cool because it's similar to what I do, but it's a little different. And it just developed from there. So I use my expertise in the performer flying industry to help me transition. There's a lot of similarities between the different types of rigging, and we could say, there's theatrical rigging, which I have done since the mid 70s. There's arena rigging, which I do. There's sailing rigging, which I don't do. Uh, Not my thing.
Yeah.
There's rescue rigging. There's so many types of rigging, and they all have things in common and they have things that are different. I will also say that, in starting in the early 1970s, I was a rock climber. Uh, I was in college at Western Carolina University, and we had an outing club, and I started doing rock climbing. I was a Boy Scout, so I was very familiar with knots. So
Sure.
we've got ropes. Now we've introduced carabiners and rigging hardware, climbing hardware. I mean, the circus industry uses hardware from uh, the arborist industry, the marine industry, the rock climbing industry, theatrical, uh, some theatrical rigging hardware and equipment, uh, the rescue industry. As I've said before, it's very eclectic in that way. So, because I had connections to a lot of these different things, circus rigging just sort of fell into place. I already had
Mm.
all the parts. I just now had to connect them all together in this new way.
Whenever I have riggers on, I really try to use it also as an opportunity to spread knowledge and information because, especially I see in the aerial industry, it growing so quickly and it's almost like the information about rigging seems to somehow unfortunately be lagging behind the information about technique and bodies in the air and other things. What is the difference between rigging, a speaker or a light and rigging a performer or rigging an artist or rigging a person?
Well, the big difference is that uh, the uh, the performer is a dynamic load, whereas a speaker and a light is a relatively static load. The light, you rig it, it hangs there, it stays there for 2 or 3 days, a week, a month, maybe longer, and never moves. The performer, unfortunately, you can't do that to them. They like to come down and eat and go to the restroom and things like that. Okay. So you just can't leave them hanging. Uh, and so you've got sometimes a load on the system, and other times you don't have a load on the system. So in some systems, you've got to have designed the system so that it works when it's in balance and when it's out of balance. So that's something to consider. But the big thing is that, a performer who will start off weighing, say, 130 pounds can generate a force of over 1,000 pounds. Whereas a speaker, if it weighed 130 pounds, it's always going to weigh that 130 pounds. So there's a big difference right there, is that we have this changing load that we have to support. And it gets a lot heavier, uh, oftentimes for very short amount of times, but it does generate that much force. So you have to be prepared for that. Also, a speaker, once you hang it, or a light, the force is always in a one direction. So
Mm.
what we have to remember about a performer is they have their weight or their load that they generate not only has magnitude, but it has a direction as well. And that direction is not constant. Sometimes it pulls to one side, sometimes to another side. And that moving back and forth can create problems. All right. I'm an expert witness right now in a, a lawsuit where the because the performer was moving back and forth, it caused the force on a piece of hardware to change, and that created metal fatigue, and eventually that piece of metal that was supporting the performer broke.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the rigger in this case did not understand that the way it was rigged was, and the way the performer was going to be uh, putting the load on that piece of hardware, what was then going to happen to that piece of hardware that would have never happened had that been a static load.
Mm. That's such a. Is the performer all right? That's such a shame. That
No,
always, these stories always break my heart. They're not all right.
no, the performer was hurt,
Mm-hmm.
seriously hurt, and that's why there's a lawsuit.
Yeah. I hope that the
Probably if the performer had not been seriously hurt, this would have been, you know, brushed under the rug some way. But
sure.
when you have people who are hurt, and I've been an expert witness. This is the fourth lawsuit that I've been involved with as an expert witness. So it's interesting to see how people make mistakes, and sometimes they're just mistakes
It's
that
such a
are
shame to
common.
me. Let me ask you this, because I had a couple people, I always, whenever I have, an expert like yourself come on, I always ask my listeners beforehand, what do you want to know? What are you afraid of? What things can we do in this interview to kind of support you and help you? And something I got from a lot of people, especially I found professional artists or people who were performing, gigging, who kind of there was a separation between the rigger and the performer. The thing they were worried about the most is they didn't know how to tell if what they were hanging from was safe, because they had to trust this other person. How much do you think it's the rigger's job to know these things? I mean, obviously it is. That would be their only job. But as far as the person who's hanging in the air, how much responsibility do you think they have? How educated do you think they should be when it comes to rigging?
I think they should be very knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is, and they don't have to be an expert rigger, but what they have to be is an advocate for themselves.
Mm.
If they don't feel that something is right, they need to speak up and say so. Okay. Uh, when I rig for someone, I want them to get onto the rig. I want them to test it out. I want them to ask me questions. If someone ever, I always ask them, would you like to come up and look at this rigging and see how I've done this? And I'll be happy to explain every item that I have chosen, what its breaking strength is, what its efficiency is, how we've done this, why I've made every decision. And I think any artist, any performer has the right to ask that of their rigger to explain what's going on. And uh, I want that person to be as comfortable as possible. I want them to think, wow, this is the most stable, this is the best rigging I've ever been on, and I have 100% confidence in this, and I'm not worrying about the rigging, I'm worrying about my performance. So in answering your question, I want the performer to be actively involved in the process, and tell me if they feel that something doesn't feel as good for them as they think it should, and exactly what that is. And then maybe I can go, okay, now I understand what you're doing.
Mm.
Uh, because sometimes you don't really know what a performer is going to do until you see it. Then you go, hey, hang on just a minute. Let me go
Mm-hmm.
and tweak this because I didn't realize you were going to swing as much as you're swinging. All right. Or I didn't realize you were going to do a drop. You said you were going to do a drop. And I asked you how much force you were going to put on it. And you told me you didn't know, maybe about this much. But having seen a lot of this, I think you're generating more force than you think you're generating.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of experience, is that I can see something, and oftentimes someone will tell me, they're going to generate this much force, and I'm going to go, I think you're going to generate more than that, based on my experience here.
Yeah.
Or I may just say, you think this, but why not this? Why don't we just double that, just for the sake of making sure that I know that everything is going to work exactly the way it needs to work. So, yeah, I want them as actively involved as possible. And if any rigger says they don't have the time to do it, just simply say, I'm not going on it.
Yeah.
Until we know that it's right.
That's fabulous. Thank you for saying that. I had planned to say that in the outro, but you just said it for me, so it's fabulous. I want to get into some of the... Yeah, go ahead.
I would just say that's just my opinion on it. And that's the way I approach rigging, is that I want to know that, I want my performers to be really happy with me.
I always approach rigging in these situations as collaborative. That it's kind of it's part of the art form. And so I have to know what I'm hanging from, what it can and can't do. And the rigger has to know what I'm going to do. So that's fabulous.
It's a dance.
Yeah, that's it.
It's a dance, and we're partners in this dance.
That's it.
Okay. I'm doing the mechanical parts of it, and you're doing the physical part of it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But we have equal importance in this process. You're just on stage and I'm not.
Yeah.
For it.
Sure.
Okay. And I'm used to being backstage, and that's fine. All right. That's where I'm happiest. But I just want to make sure that when that performer goes out there, that I am not worried about them. I know that the rigging is going to do what it needs to do.
That's pretty incredible. Have you ever tried any of it? Have you ever gone up and done any aerial work before?
I'm not an aerialist. Okay.
Excellent
That's
answer.
That's just not my part of it. Okay. I understand what they do. And they do, what they do so much better than what I do. And what I do so much better than I think they could do.
Sure.
So together we team up to put on this performance.
Fabulous. I want to ask you, just kind of out of my own interest in nerddom, I'm a good friend of Constance Palmer. I know you know Connie very well. And we have a kind of it's not an argument, but it's kind of an ongoing discussion about breaking strength. What's the minimum breaking strength of any of your systems? Do you have, when it comes to a circus or a human dynamic load?
Every component will have a different breaking strength, most likely.
Right. Maybe to start, could you define breaking strength for me really quick for our audience?
Well, sure. Easily. A breaking strength is when an item, how much force it takes for an item to become two parts. I mean, that's what happened, or two or more parts. All right.
Right.
That's its breaking strength.
Yes.
Now, of course, it's always important to know the breaking strength, and then to that we apply what is called a design factor. If you're going to put 1,000 pounds of force, I don't want to have a piece of hardware that has a breaking strength of 1,000 pounds or even 1,001 pounds. I want to have it that has a multiple of some number and that's why I want to know how much force you're generating. So if you generate 1,000 pounds, then I might want a part that will hold at least 5,000 pounds. All right. And that's a minimum in a particular case. Now, let me just point out something here. That number 5,000 pounds is a really good number, because first of all, let's go back to OSHA. And if you don't know what OSHA is, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and they basically have rules that say how much force does something can we put on something, whether it's a person or a piece of hardware. And what they say is the maximum force that you can put on a person is 1,800 pounds. All right, that's the maximum of force that they will allow a person to take.
Okay.
Now, all right, it would be very hard for a person to generate, for a performer to generate 1,800 pounds. And if you did, you would be seriously hurting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's their rule.
Okay.
And part of that rule is based upon how much force would it take to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's just come up with a nice round number here that might work in this case, which is around 2,500 pounds.
All right.
If you were to generate 2,500 pounds of dynamic force and place this on your body in a jerking motion, the chances are good that your internal organs wouldn't stay attached to the inside of your body the way they currently are. Your kidneys would kind of fall down in your crotch, your stomach, your spleen. Those things would just be ripped from their pinnings inside of your thorax and that whole cavity in there, and would end up in your crotch.
Needless to say, it would be a trick you only did once.
Yeah, it would be a trick you'd only do once.
Okay.
So since if you generated more than 2,500 pounds, it would kill you.
Yes.
It would make no sense to say, well, the limit needs to be 10,000 pounds because, you're going to be dead long before you ever get to that.
Yeah.
So their rule in terms of fall protection is 5,000 pounds, twice the load that it would take to kill you.
Okay.
All right. So, from my old rock climbing days, if you're up on the mountain and you're climbing and you have the rope attached to your harness and you were to fall, you don't really need a rope that will hold 10,000 pounds, because if you generated 5,000 pounds, you'd be dead.
Right.
And then they just have to come up and get you.
Right.
So if you generate, say, 4,000 pounds, it would kill you, but the rope would break and at least they wouldn't have to go up to get your body. So 5,000 pounds is kind of, a big magic number. If anything will hold 5,000 pounds, then it's substantial enough.
All right.
Okay. Now, that's assuming the worst.
Right.
But let's now say you're not going to, let's say you generate 500 pounds. We don't need a 5,000 pounds. We might, if we had something that would hold 5,000 pounds, that would be way over, that would be, more than needed. So oftentimes we'll say there's a rule in performer flying that it is 6 times your expected dynamic load.
Okay.
So if you generate, say, 600 pounds, generally, if we had something that would hold 3,600 pounds, then that would be strong enough.
Okay.
I tend to like that 5,000 pound rule, though, because I know that's bomb proof. You're never going to need that.
I like it too. And I think something that always causes me a great amount of despair is that aside from companies like Cirque du Soleil, there doesn't really seem to be any gold standard or any industry standard for some of these facts and figures. Do you know? So,
well, there are, but they're not from the circus industry.
Okay.
The circus industry does not have a standard. There's a discussion group right now that's having this that's on Facebook that's been discussing standards for circuses, and it's really hard because it's circus is so eclectic, and the same rule that might apply to a lyra would not apply to a flying trapeze. They're just totally different apparatus.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to say, all right, so we got to have a standard for this kind of apparatus and a standard for that kind of apparatus. And so the rigging, it's just so eclectic. And, what skills would a rigger need? Well, once again, the flying trapeze is a unique apparatus. It's just different. Zip lines, slack lines are different kind of apparatus. Tight wires. A lot of the quote unquote more circusy types of aerial devices are different than the more aerial dance types of apparatus, lyras, static trapezes, and
aerial silks, rope.
Yeah,
those
and silks are one of the more is probably the silks and lyras are probably two of the most common apparatus.
Sure.
So rigging those are completely different than rigging a flying trapeze or a tight wire.
Mm-hmm. Now let me ask you a question. With the great pandemic that occurred, maybe you've heard about it. I don't know.
I've heard rumors of it. Yes.
Yeah, here and there. A lot of people have taken to rigging in their homes.
Of course,
I'm not even sure if I have a question for you right now. I would just love to hear your thoughts on that. Or, because Connie and I did do something at the beginning of the pandemic, which is kind of about safety and how to ensure that, you're not rigging from a little bolt that's hanging out of your ceiling or some fancy lighting fixture in your kitchen.
Right.
Yeah. But I would love to hear your kind of take on all of this. How is it?
Of course.
Yeah.
No problem.
Please.
All right. So there's two issues in rigging in a residence. And that is first, and well, there's more than two issues. But let's start with the first one here is making sure that there is not a catastrophic failure. That's when one thing becomes two things, and you or somebody else ends up on the floor in a heap. Okay, so that's one aspect of it, and you've got to know that the point that you're rigging to is able to support that force. The second thing, and it's slightly different, is you need to make sure that you don't damage your home. You can bring your roof down. You can crack the walls of your house. Okay, you can cause serious structural damage to your house. So those are two entirely different things that you need to be aware of that you could do. And make sure you don't do either one of those.
The reason I'm laughing, I think, is because I've been so concerned about the first one that I didn't even think about the poor house.
Yes. Well, it's certainly, a house is repairable, but you could cause $10,000 of damage to your home. And suddenly you realize, for the money that it's cost me in repairing my home, think of I could have gone out and bought a couple of professional freestanding rigs and put in my backyard, the things that were designed for this. But I was trying to get out on the cheap, so I went up into to my attic, and I wrapped this rope around this beam up there and dropped it down through a hole in my ceiling, and I thought I was good to go. And then when the ceiling, crashes in, or you see cracks coming down the walls because, that load has to go somewhere. It's going to go from the beam, it's going to go out to the sides, and it's going to come down. And if it's resting on the walls,
yeah,
it didn't have the support that it needed.
And I don't know too many homeowners insurance policies that cover aerial rigging as as damages.
Well, you'd be hard pressed to try to explain, what happened. And I'm sure there are people who can do it with a straight face, and I'm sure their insurance agents would just shake their head, and that's not covered. A common thing that is often said is that if your homeowner's insurance wouldn't cover a pool, it won't cover this.
It's an excellent.
Okay.
Yeah.
So sometimes if you have a pool, you have to have an additional rider added to it. And then there are people who go, I don't care. It's my house. I'll do what I want to with it. And you're absolutely free to do that. Just be aware if someone comes into your house and they start climbing up that silk and it falls, now you're not only responsible for the repairs to your house, but you're going to be responsible for whatever happened to them. So that's, once again, kind of a tangent of hurting yourself is hurting someone else.
Sure.
Who may be in your home.
Sure.
And may want to play on your aerial rig.
So is your solution kind of to go to a reputable person who sells circus rigs and manufactures circus rigs and just have that installed? Is that generally your advice to people who want to rig in their home?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Okay.
It depends on the individual. It depends on the structure of the house. Sometimes, sometimes people. I worked with a woman in Hawaii who literally built an aerial studio onto her home. I mean, she hired an architect and an engineer and me as a consultant, and we designed a structure that would support this and so forth. Okay. Sometimes people, know enough about engineering to be able to understand, when you talk about bending moments on a beam, what that means and why that's important, shear forces on a beam, and the contractors building contractors who understand these terms, they go, okay, what's our, how can you decrease the bending moment? Mm-hmm. How can we decrease? We know what you're going to, we need to find out what you're going to generate, how much force it is. Then we're going to design a structure that will support that much force. So the longer the beam, assuming, let's say that we're hanging the point in the center of that beam, the longer the beam, the greater the bending moment in the center. So you want to have that beam being as short as possible. Now, that doesn't change the shear forces on either side of that beam. So now that's the next thing we need to look at after we've dealt with the bending moment problems, because the bending moment is going to probably be the worst problem. Now let's look at the next worst problem. So there are times when people go, this is my house. I plan to be in this house for the next 15, 20 years. I want to do aerial in this room in my house, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this work.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go, okay, then if you're willing to do that, let's now look at what that would be. And sometimes, you know, people like to have lots of, I talked about bending moments, and they're worse when you have a long span. And guess where people like to do their aerial work? In the middle of long spans. They like a lot of
Well,
space
we like a lot of
around them
space around us. We want to
so
spin
they don't
around. We
run
want
into
to,
the
yeah,
walls
exactly.
and
We don't want
things
to kick
like
a
that.
wall.
But they don't realize, well, there's there's a trade-off there of having all that much space. You're
Right.
going to create a bigger bending moment. That means we need to create a different kind of beam here to support that. And here's how we can do it. It's not always as difficult as people imagine it could be. It's not always as expensive. You can do it yourself, but it does mean you have to understand the physics of the situation, and you take those into account. And that's where the rigger comes into play. Can say, I mean, I've got software and I can bring it up and I can say, you're going to generate this much force, and here's how long that beam is, and here's your bending moment.
Yeah.
Okay, now that we know the bending moment, you know now we can start dealing with that number.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, you know, part of what's, when we talk about outdoor aerial rigs, portable rigs, uh, one of the things about them is that they have a lot of flex to them. That flex absorbs a lot of the shock load. So even though you're generating a lot of shock load, the flex absorbs it. Um, there's a company called CIRCUS Gear, Todd Sperling's company.
Yes.
And
Love
you're
Todd.
familiar with that.
Todd's
And
excellent.
if you
Yes.
notice the difference between, say, his rig and the Ludwig rig or Bobby's big topped rig, one of the things that uh, Todd did was he made the head very small. It's
Mm-hmm.
only about 30 inches wide. What does that do? That reduces the bending moment tremendously. Okay, so he used his understanding of structures to design a rig that will take more force in that respect. That's not to say the others aren't good rigs,
Absolutely.
but it's just an understanding of the physics. But they all have flex to them to absorb some of the shocks, which makes it more comfortable for the performer.
Fantastic. I wanna ask you another question, kind of going off of this, but not so much. And this is a question I get all the time. I'm sure you get all the time, but I some things feel like they can never be answered enough. Aluminum versus steel. Can you put
Mm-hmm.
aluminum and steel together? Discuss. What are your thoughts on
Okay.
this? Yeah,
Everything has pros and cons.
great.
Okay.
Yes.
I like to use the phrase, there is no such thing as a perfect solution. All right. And I say, as a great example, I say that my wife is not perfect. I am not perfect, but I'll say she's not perfect for this example. She disagrees with me, of course. But if you're looking for a spouse or a significant other or whatever you want to call it that is perfect, you're going to be a very disappointed person. Your goal is to find the best match for you, not the perfect match. And the same thing, and I say that, you know, um, a relationship is a solution to a problem. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So anytime you're looking at any problem, never assume there's going to be a perfect solution to that problem. Every solution will have pros and cons. You evaluate those and choose the best solution. So when it comes to steel versus aluminum, They have different properties, and neither one of them is necessarily perfect. Aluminum is lighter weight than steel. In some cases, weight is the problem you're trying to overcome. Steel is stronger than aluminum. Sometimes that's the problem you're trying to overcome. Steel will rust. Aluminum does not rust. Okay. Steel will bend and tell you it's overloaded, whereas aluminum will not bend and tell you that it's overloaded. It will just snap in two. Everything has pros and cons. Can you put the two of them together? Absolutely. When people used to say at one point, "Oh, you can't combine steel and aluminum because there will be this galvanic disproportional something another going along between the two of them and it will cause them to corrode." And then I go, "Oh, so you put aluminum bolts into your aluminum truss when you put it together?" And of course, of course not. Well, you're creating the very problem that you said we couldn't do. And then there's this long pause as they are frustrated by the fact that they've just
Been proven wrong, maybe?
been proven
Perhaps.
themselves wrong.
Yeah.
So you can use them together. One of the classic examples in aerial rigging is an aluminum swivel with a steel carabiner. And I always say the steel carabiner is going to win every time, and your aluminum swivel will wear. Okay. But there's a solution. Take a piece of the latex tubing, cut it about 3 inches long, slide it onto your carabiner. Now, when you hook that onto your aluminum swivel, it's going to be that piece of latex that is going to wear before the aluminum. Whatever the weakest thing is what's going to wear. Then when that starts to wear through, you take it off and you put another piece on there, and you will protect your aluminum swivel. So you can use aluminum and steel together. You just have to understand what's going to happen and sometimes take precautions to make sure that it doesn't happen.
Why have I never heard that before? Covering your carabiners with a latex tube. That's brilliant.
Yeah, any kind of a vinyl tube, anything that's going to take the wear first.
Right.
And once again, then you do routine inspections on that. And when you see that start to wear through, pull it off, put on another little piece, and you're good to go again.
Now, how often do you how often do you inspect gear? How often do you recommend people do inspections?
It depends.
Yeah. I mean, as a straps artist, I am constantly rigging and unrigging my hardware, so I'm looking at it pretty much every day.
And that's what you should do. You should look at it every time. Every time you touch it, you should look at it.
Mm-hmm.
There are some things that you just look at more often because you can.
Yeah.
Well, what's it going to take you? Another 5-10 seconds?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. To look at that, to see. Now, you brought up that you're a strap artist. That's an interesting device because, sometimes strap artists do things that are I've seen very slow and artistic and very dance-like motions. Other times there's swinging dislocks and big drops and things on straps. So some straps take a lot of force, where other straps may not take a lot of force. The kinds of straps you pick, the materials that they're made of, are very important depending upon how you're using it. If you're doing something very slow and easy, then you might use a cotton strap. Cotton isn't as strong as some of the synthetic materials. But if you're doing, big dislock moves, you want something that will take a lot of force. I mean, there was the performer in Las Vegas a few years ago who was doing a dislock move on a strap, and the straps broke, and he fell and broke his neck.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's paralyzed from the waist down.
Yeah.
How you're using it. I've seen people put straps on liras and do some pretty amazingly dynamic force drops on that, more than anything else I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Any other apparatus. It's just that straps don't have the stretch that a silk has, and therefore doesn't absorb the shock. So I don't know what you do, how dynamic your moves are, but it's, once again, those are things to consider, and how often you inspect it, and who you get your straps from.
I currently work on a Patty Miller's aerial animal straps. They're cotton
Okay.
nylon blend, and they're fantastic, and I love them.
Patty Miller is a
Shout
good
out
friend
to
of
Patty.
mine.
Yeah, she's great.
She's
Love her.
she's a sweetheart.
Fantastic.
And she sent me a whole bunch of straps, little short straps about 2 feet long, and I broke them.
Excellent.
I pulled them until I had two pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sent her back photographs, and I said, all right, here is where it first started breaking. And this is what it looked like at this point, and this is when it became 2 pieces. Now, on her straps, you want to look to see if the cotton's on the outside,
Mm-hmm.
with the nylon on the inside. When you start seeing the cotton will start breaking, and you will see the nylon, that's when you retire that. Just retire it instantly at that
Mm-hmm.
point.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to put about at least 1,200 pounds of force on that strap to get it to do that. So that's a lot of force. But remember the thing about any type of drop move, you're not just going to do it once. You're going to do it again and again and again. You're just going to keep hammering that piece of equipment.
Yes.
And eventually, it's going to start. And so where you want to look, you want to, of course, check at the stitching, because that's one place you can start having failures. And also right in the middle of the strap.
Okay.
If the strap starts to get thinner towards the middle, you're in trouble. Think about this. Think about taking a piece of saltwater taffy and pulling it.
Uh-huh.
What happens to it? It gets thinner in the middle, doesn't it?
Yes.
All right, that's called necking. That's, as opposed to when I grew up, necking was an entirely different term. But this is an engineering term, necking.
All right.
So necking, the material will actually, you'll see it start to get thinner, and always be aware of the edges of the strap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. You could punch a hole in the middle of a strap and do X amount of damage. But if you cut the edge of the strap just a tiny bit, you've done a tremendous amount of damage, because it'll just tear right straight across.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like, just take a piece of cotton fabric and put a little tiny snip in it, and then just grab it and just, it'll rip in two. But until you make that snip, it'll take a lot of force. So these are different ways of it's important to understand your apparatus, so that you know how to inspect it properly, and when to say, okay, this thing has reached its deadline, and the problem with the Las Vegas accident is the person who owned that strap knew that the strap was worn, but he didn't know when to replace it.
Mm.
And, it was, and then all it took was that one
So
flip,
tragic.
and both straps,
Yeah.
absolutely, it snapped in two like breaking a candy stick. It was there, and then it was
And I've
two
actually
pieces.
seen that. And actually, I had a pair of cotton straps break on me. Now, I was very low to the ground doing something very. I was. I don't even want to say lucky, but I've seen that happen so often that I don't care what you're doing on the straps. You're not using cotton around me. I don't mess with it at all. I don't want it. I don't want any
Mhm.
part of it. If it's just cotton, no. Mm-mm.
And that's good advice. Circus Concepts, they now say that their straps have a 5,000-pound breaking strength.
Okay.
What does that mean? It means you're going to be dead before the straps break. You're going to be dead twice.
Yeah, you're
All
gonna have an
right.
arm up on the strap, and your body is gonna be on the ground before the strap breaks.
That's right.
Yeah,
Your arm will be hanging there and your body will be down, but the strap will not break.
sounds like a nightmare I have every night in my.
Okay.
Yeah, no, this is great, and it's an excellent point too, because I think so often we have discussions about the hardware or the beams, the structure that you're rigging to, but the apparatus itself is also a part of the rigging and something that people need to be aware
Absolutely.
of. Let me ask you this. What do you do with your, I mean, I'm sure you do something crazy with it, but what do you recommend the average aerialist do if they need to retire a carabiner, if they need to retire a aerial silk? What do you, especially with hardware, I think, is there recycling centers for this? Should they just send it to you so you can break it in half? What do you what do you recommend?
They can send it to me and I'll break it in half. I've had people do that.
Sure.
Um, there are recycling centers, but a lot of those places will just simply sell scrap metal to somebody, and you don't want somebody to come in and purchase something that you're going to throw away. You could certainly put it in the trash, but make sure you don't put it in a public trash place somewhere where somebody goes dumpster diving and getting it.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that how we use equipment, or you could take give it to somebody with a metal grinder and let them just take a big gouge out of it and make it obvious that it's, that something's wrong.
Right.
The biggest thing is that people will use a piece of equipment that's not in perfect condition. So, for example, you have an auto locking carabiner that's no longer auto locking. It's a spring that's broken. The carabiner itself is just fine. It's just that the spring that makes it auto lock is not doing its thing anymore. And so if it's not doing its thing, it's dangerous. Okay, so you want to get rid of it. So, even as tough as it is, you take it out and beat it with, you're going to have to beat it with a pretty big hammer to physically make it look damaged.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So just be careful that somebody doesn't get it and say, oh, well, this looks fine to me. And then it doesn't lock and then it pops open on them. And that's what it can do. So, I might just, put it in my personal trash can and let the garbage man pick it up and dump it into the, it's done automatically. They don't go through my garbage because I can see it gets picked up and dumped in the big machine.
Yep. All
in
right.
the truck. That would probably be fine. If you want to send them to me, that's fine. I'll be happy to take them and test them and show people because I do a lot of. And here's the other thing. I'm going to give you an example. I used to do some work for a big theme park in Florida. And we won't mention which one because there's tons of them. But it was a big
rhyme with Walt Disney?
No, it actually doesn't.
Okay.
But that's another story.
All right.
And they had an aerial effect. And so periodically they would replace all the cables. And then they would take the cables and they would send them out and have them tested, pulled. And they wanted to make sure that all the cables that they sent out and were tested, when they got the results back, they met or exceeded the minimum breaking strength of a new cable. Because if they got to the point where they were using so long that they dropped down below that, then they didn't know how strong they were.
Right.
So you want to replace things before you know they're dangerous. Now, when it comes to we talked about the wear of carabiners, aluminum carabiners, and aluminum
Swivels and
things like that. You know that the basic rule here is that you measure the thickness of the metal. If you lose 10% or more of that metal, then that piece of hardware should be thrown away. The manufacturers know that they overrate this hardware so that it can lose that 10%.
Okay.
And still be good. Okay. That's why when I break hardware, new hardware, it always breaks higher than the minimum breaking strength. Okay.
It's like the expiration date on food, you know?
Exactly.
I don't know, maybe I'm a little weirder, but I don't mind eating some yogurt that, you know, is a couple days past the expiration date, because I know they've kind of put some wiggle room in there, you know?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly right. So that's why you want to check this and get rid of, you know, but some things you can't see the wear, like cable, because its wear is internal. And it fatigues, and metal fatigue is very hard to discern. You know, your carabiners aren't bending very much. Okay. Right. Whereas a cable does.
And a cable would generally be used, just for the listeners, maybe inside of a doubles trapeze that has cotton wrapped around it. Cables are used on flying trapezes, swinging trapezes.
But they don't tend to bend.
That's true. That's a good point.
Okay, so you don't have that problem where you have a cable on a winch.
Okay.
Where it runs through pulleys. Anytime a cable runs through pulleys, it's bending. It's bending back and forth and back and forth. And I don't have one right here. Yes, I do. So you have this piece of cable here, and it gets bent as it goes around a pulley. And it goes around this way here, and then when it goes back, it gets bent back. It will twist because of the way it's constructed, so it gets bent back and forth, and it's made to be flexible. A cable is a machine, so it's made to do that with, you know, but it won't do it indefinitely. Okay, so at a certain point, you want to replace your cables. Now, where you have cables on a flying trapeze, you know, those are going to last so much longer because they're not bent back and forth. They tend to stay fairly straight and rigid. They have a little bit of flexibility to them.
Gotcha.
Well, they have the same amount of flexibility. They're just not being flexed as much.
They're just not being put to the test. I see what you're saying. And generally I see, I'm trying to think. No, because generally what I will see, especially here in Montreal, is there will be cable that attaches from the apparatus or the point up in the ceiling through those two pulleys. But then what you usually like tie off with or goes back and forth through a block or something is generally rope. So that I guess that is for the wear and tear of the cable to kind of let it last a bit longer.
No.
Oh, all right.
You can't get a good grip on a piece of wire rope.
That's very true.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you want something with more girth to it.
Yeah, it's very true.
Also, it's easier to tie off.
Absolutely.
You know, you can do it, and there's ways of doing things like that, but you know, it depends on the apparatus, the need.
Can you define, you mentioned this very early in the interview, but what is efficiency?
What is efficiency?
In the context of,
All right. So the easiest one for people to understand is efficiency of rope.
Okay.
So when you buy a piece of rope, the manufacturer is going to tell you this rope has either a working load limit of X based on a design factor of Y. But most often they'll say it has a minimum breaking strength of 5,000 pounds or 10,000 pounds or 7,819 pounds, something like that.
All right.
Okay. But you're not going to use that rope exactly the way it came off the spool. You're going to terminate that rope, usually with a loop on one end, or tie it to two pieces together in some kind of knot. When you do that, you're bending that rope and you're decreasing its breaking strength. And so every knot has an efficiency rating. Every kind of termination of a cable has an efficiency rating. Of course, the highest efficiency rating would be 100%. Swaged sleeves on a wire rope will give you 100% efficiency rating. You take a rope, tie an overhand knot in it, you've now decreased its efficiency by 50%. You pull that, it will now break at 50% of what the manufacturers told you it would break at. So every kind of termination has efficiencies. So if I buy a rope that has a 5,000 pound breaking strength, as soon as I tie a loop in it, I have to derate that rope because of the efficiency of the knot. And so now that's my new number, not the breaking strength of the rope, but its revised breaking strength based upon the efficiency of the termination.
Wow, that is the shortest, most simple explanation of efficiency I've ever heard. Do you have a favorite knot? What's your favorite knot? Just out of curiosity.
Oh, I have tons of favorite knots.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like saying, what's my favorite child?
You can't play favorites.
I have favorites. There's no question I have favorite knots. But it depends upon the situation. Once again, there's no such thing as a perfect knot, but I'm going to choose the best knot. I'm going to look at, and if you had multiple children, you might say, all right, if I need someone to run fast, this is the one I'm going to choose. Okay. That doesn't mean that is my favorite child. It means it's my favorite child for this activity. If I needed somebody to make me chocolate chip cookies, then this child may be better at making chocolate chip cookies. So that becomes my favorite child for that activity. Knots are exactly the same way. Okay. I have favorite knots for different activities depending upon what I'm wanting.
Fantastic. Oh, man. Listen, we're coming to the end, but someone just informed me the other day that you have an online course in rigging.
Yes, I do. I have a 29 lesson course in aerial rigging safety. The URL is,
we can find it and put it in the show notes.
Hall Rigging. It's hallriggingacademy.thinkific.com.
Fantastic.
THINIFIC, Thinkific.
Yes.
And that covers a pretty wide group of traditional aerial rigging topics, and then some non-traditional things, but like my Delbertisms.
Fantastic.
Which you already know, one of my favorites is that there is no such thing as a perfect solution to a problem. And another one of my favorites is that let's see, If you only have one option, you don't have an option. If you only know one way to do something, that's the way you have to do it. If you only have one tool in your toolbox, I always say, if you only have a hammer, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem is a nail. Okay? The more ways you know how to solve the more solutions you have to a potential problem, the better the chance that you will be able to choose the best option. If you only met one person in your life, okay, and you were looking for a significant other, you don't have an option, do you? You don't have a choice. That's going to be the person.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
So, you know, so I have my Delbertisms in there as well.
That's
But
fantastic. I'm
I
so
don't.
glad you made it, that online course.
Well, thank you.
That's great. And I will share the link far and wide with everybody who listens to this podcast. Final question for you. What advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of your rigging career?
Do something else.
No way. Why do you say that?
Oh, I don't know. You know, you're always second guessing yourself and thinking, oh, well, what if I had become, you know, a knee surgeon?
Yeah.
I'm getting my first knee replaced in about 6 weeks. So,
oh man.
and when I went to the orthopedic surgeon yesterday, in fact, and he just seemed so excited about what he did. I thought, wow, you know, that must be a great career. You know, he was just so excited and felt good about, because now he uses, you know, robotic surgery.
How cool is that?
And he said, you know, I can be within 1 degree of perfect 95% of the time. You know, and he said this with so much pride in his voice that I thought, man, this guy really, you know, enjoys what he's doing. I hope he feels that good on April 18th or May 18th, excuse me, May 18th.
Well, I hope so too. But knees, I think, are pretty simple. They're hinge joints. People get them replaced all the time. I think it's pretty straightforward.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
So that question you'll probably want to leave out of the interview.
No, I got to keep that in. That's great advice. Do something else.
So no, I mean, you know, find something that really makes you happy. You know, and I've done a lot of different things in my life, you know, that have made me happy, and I've had things that, you know, where I just go, you know, sometimes when I tell people what I do, that I fly performers, they go, wow, that must be the best job in the world. Because some days it is, and some days it's not. Okay, you know, it has to do with who you're working with. All right, just like this interview. This interview has been so much fun because you have been so much fun.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
You've laughed at every one of my jokes, as bad as they are. Okay. So, but, you know, I've done these with other people and it has felt like pulling teeth, my teeth. Okay. So, you know, that's the thing. Fine. You know, there's that old saying, you know, I'm an old guy now. And so I know lots of old sayings, you know, but there's one, you know, find a job that you love and you'll never work a day in your life. You know, so that's another thing, is find something that you love. But I've been lucky enough in my life that I've been able to do lots of things that I love. And, you know, I have enjoyed over the last year studying more engineering and things like that. And, you know, where I enjoy doing math, my wife thinks that's the definition of hell, is having to do math. I love Microsoft Excel. She despises Excel. Okay. So, you know,
it sounds like a match made in heaven.
Yeah, we totally disagree on so many things. So, but she's perfect for me. She's She's the best for me. She's not perfect,
Right.
although she can make some incredible chocolate chip cookies
Ooh,
to die for.
that sounds excellent.
So that alone is enough to keep her around.
Yes. Well, I wish you the best on your surgery. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Thank you for making good jokes. I always love a laugh, and I love to learn. So this was great. Thank you so much, Delbert.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it tremendously.
That was my interview with Rigger and budding comedian Delbert Hall. I want to do a little bit of a longer wrap up today because there was a lot of information in this podcast and I want to make sure it gets repeated or clarified. So, first thing that kind of stuck out that we talked about was dynamic versus static loads. So, a load in this context, in super layman's terms, is the amount of weight or force that is being carried by a rigging system. A static load is one that stays still. It is when you're talking about inanimate objects. So, as Delbert said, a 130-pound speaker is going to be a 130-pound speaker, is going to be a 130-pound speaker, no matter where you hang it. A dynamic load would be like if you were to hang me in the air. I am not 130 pounds. I mean, I am when I'm just hanging there, but I am moving around, which means that I am going to create force, which means that I am going to get heavier, maybe lighter if I let go all of a sudden and then re-grab. And it also means that I'm going to be moving around, right? I'm not going to be just hanging down under one solid point, but maybe I'm going to be challenging the rigging by swinging, by spinning, by doing circles, other things. So Delbert can take all of that into account, and you should too. Now, Delbert talks about in the interview how he can look at a drop, and because he has what's called a loading cell, which can tell how much force is being put on a system at a given time, he's probably had years of looking at those and looking at people doing certain drops that are very popular in aerial performance and knows about how much force all of those drops create. Now, you don't have to be that well educated, but you do have to know that there is a difference between a dynamic and a static load. And if you ever run into a rigger or someone who wants to hang you somewhere and is like, oh, well, you know what? You're only 130 pounds. You'll be okay. That person does not know what they're talking about. Because yes, while you are 130 pounds, just like a speaker or something, that does not necessarily mean that you will stay that weight during your activity. So that's point one, dynamic versus static load. Point two, rigging is collaborative. It is a collaborative effort. So this is when I asked Delbert, how much should an aerialist know about rigging? Because it is presumably a rigger's job. And he said that he would encourage any aerialist to know quite a bit. You don't have to be an expert rigger, but you do have to be an advocate for yourself. And you have to know when you go to a venue, basically what you need. And that means coming prepared. You can come with a video of your act to show the rigger. And you can ask questions about the system. I want to empower any aerialist out there who's listening to this to get very curious about what you're hanging from and ask questions. Ask your aerial teacher what you're hanging from at your studio. Don't take for granted the idea that just because someone's in charge means that they know the ins and outs of everything. Keep asking questions until you understand what you're hanging from. You're not a diva. You're not difficult. You're not starting drama. You're trying to be informed. That's part of being an aerialist. That's part of practicing your craft. Point three is about breaking strength, which Delbert defines as how much force an item can take before it becomes two parts. Breaking strength, how strong it is before it breaks. And this is the part where he started to get very graphic about your kidneys going up through your thorax or something awful like that. Basically, all you need to know is 5,000 pounds is more than sufficient for a breaking strength. I like to use around 2,500, 3,500, but it will depend, again, on how much force you are putting on the system. Point 4, rigging at home. Rigging at home provides 2 specific issues that Delbert brought up. The first is the one that we're always harping on. It's unsafe for your body. If you rig poorly from something and you don't know what you're doing, then you could fall and get hurt. However, it can also really damage your house, as Delbert brought up. And very rarely does insurance cover a damaged house because you decided to do some bizarre MacGyver situation type rigging. So it is advised, if you want to train at home during this time, that you get an aerial rig from a reputable company like Circus Gear, Circus Concepts, Ludwig, and or you employ the knowledge of someone like Delbert, a structural engineer, or someone else who knows what you're doing specifically. Because remember, you are going to be a dynamic load in the air, and how your house works specifically. I know a lot of people want to cut corners with this because they think it's expensive, but actually what's expensive are medical bills and having to repair your house. It's far cheaper to get Delbert on the phone for an hour, to hire a consultant to really quickly come in, because the solution may be a lot less expensive than you think. But a lot of times people just assume that because it's strange, because it seems really niche, means it's going to be very expensive. And that's not always the case. Get informed. You'll be pleasantly surprised. Point 5, Delbert settles the steel versus aluminum, or can you put steel on aluminum? He solves the quandary for all of us forever. Yes, it's totally possible. If you don't want to wear out your hardware as quickly, put a little latex sleeve around it. I think he said latex. Maybe I'm thinking of something else. Anyway, number 6, inspecting your rigging. If there's something that's not doing the thing that it should be doing anymore, you have to get rid of it. That means it's dangerous. And Delbert used a really good example with the tri-locking carabiners. So that's a carabiner that generally they're a little bit more difficult to open because you have to push down on the gate and then you twist it and then it will open. If when you release it, it doesn't automatically snap back into place, that means it's broken. The spring on it doesn't work anymore. And that means it's out of repair or it's dangerous and it needs to be retired. You can send it to Delbert and he will be happy to break it in half. Just email him and I'm sure he'll give you his address, hanging out down in Tennessee, breaking carabiners apart. And finally, point 7, your apparatus is part of your rigging. So you could go to a structural engineer. You could get the best system possible in your home. You could set up all your hardware. You could have everything nice. And then if you're hanging up straps that are made of cotton or an aerial silk that has a bunch of holes in it or a poorly welded aerial hoop, none of the rest of it matters. Make sure that you're getting your apparatuses from reputable sources. I have an episode on welding, and I will put that in the show notes. And I will also put Delbert Hall's Rigging Academy online, amazing online course, hallriggingacademy.thinkific.com. And I will also link that in the show notes if anybody wants it. And as for me, for aerial training tips and inspiration, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at _artist_athlete. My Facebook is The Artist Athlete. TheArtistAthlete.com is my website. And that Patreon site, I know you've already got it written down on your hand, but just in case it kind of wore off as you were sweating through all the information you were getting from that episode, it's patreon.com/TheArtistAthlete. Thanks for tuning in, friends, fans, and foes. I'll talk at you next week. The Artist Athlete podcast is supported solely by donations from people like you. Here's what some of those people have to say.
Hi, my name is Noah and I do hand balancing. Hi, my name is Woody and I do Leo. Thank you for listening to the Artist Athlete podcast.
Hi, I'm Freya. You can hear my whole story in episode 50 of the Artist Athlete podcast, but I'm here to tell you about something else that I do. I'm a qualified health and nutrition coach. I help people with sleep and body confidence, among other things. You can see everything I have to offer at wildguidance.com or follow me on Instagram at wildguidance.
Hi everyone, I'm Dominique, a ground acrobat, trapeze artist, and coach, currently bringing circus to the extremely cold but very beautiful Northern Ontario, Canada. Circus has changed my life and I'm so grateful to everyone in this community. Find me on Instagram at DomUpsideDown or my website domupsidedown.com.
Aloha! My name is Beth Russell, and I live on the beautiful island of Maui, Hawaii. I am an aerial artist and movement instructor specializing in chakra yoga to keep me balanced and grounded. I play with silks, trapeze, lyra, rope, acro, aerial yoga and dance, slacklining, pole, bungee, and climbing. Really anything that goes up and allows me to explore 3D space. You can find my dedicated aerial page on Instagram at Maui Aerialist. If you find yourself coming to Maui, let's play.
Hey there, friends, fans, and enemies. This is Chris Alston, Patreon of the Artist Athlete Podcast, straps artist and lyra performer and acrobat out of Greenville, South Carolina. So if you're ever passing through, make sure to stop in and see me and my friends. We have a wonderful space, and we'd love to see you.
Hi, my name is Erica Lee. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm an aerialist. I teach performing arts to elementary school during the day and do pole and sling and rope by night. I really like the Artist Athlete podcast because it gives me a lot of circus goals to look forward to. It gives me a lot of insight on what's going on around the world in circus, and that's why I'm a Patreon.
Hello all. Thank you for tuning in to the Artist Athlete podcast. I am Opal Schwartz from Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're ever in the cities, feel free to stop by the Aviary Minneapolis. It's a great time. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and goodbye.
Hey there, artists and athletes. This is Andy Smith, owner and artistic director at Saltaire Circus School in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. And I want to thank you for contributing to the Artist Athlete podcast. If you ever find yourself down in Florida, come check us out. Whether you're an artist, athlete, or someone ordinary just looking to be extraordinary, we got a place for you.